Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. With $4.83, you can buy a large coffee, grab a medium-sized movie theater popcorn, or even pay for 30 minutes of big downtown parking. With that same $4.80 through Christ-centered microfinance, you can impact the life of a child for a year, maybe forever. The evidence is overwhelming. When parents are given opportunities, the lives of their kids improve. This book brings together data and 10 compelling real-life stories that show you how kids win through Christ-centered microfinance. And you win too. This book will educate and bless you as you engage in the aspect of God's incredible unfolding plan. All the net proceeds from the book sales will be donated to Christ-centered microfinance organizations. By purchasing a book, you're impacting the life of a child for a year, maybe forever. You can find out more about this amazing organizations that they support on their website at kids-win.com/organizations. Jenn Tarbell has spent over 10 years working directly for and with Christ-centered microfinance organizations as an employee, executive team member, consultant, and board member. She devoted significant time on the ground internationally with clients, workers, and donors, seeing and evaluating these efforts and operations. She's also an entrepreneur and has spent the last 3 years working on various technology startups. Jenn's deep passion is seeing lives transformed through business, especially microfinance. Joining us now to talk about their book, co-authored with Lance Wood, entitled $4.83, The Cost to Impact the Life of a Child for a Year, Maybe Forever, is Jenn Tarbell. Jenn, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thanks, Rabbi. It's an honor to be here.
Jenn, take us back to the early years of what contributed to the Jenn we see today.
Yeah, gosh, one of the things that immediately comes to my mind is, right out of college. So I was born and raised in a Christian home, and did the Christian thing, and went to college in LA. And at the end of my college experience, I remember I graduated, and I had struggled with the eating disorder early on in my life, and I still felt the effects of that eating disorder. I still struggled. I still had lots of thoughts about food and shame and just burdens from my past. And I remember saying to God, I was probably 21 or 22 at the time. I remember saying to God, I read the Bible and I see how you part the seas and heal the sick and you make the blind see. And this really can't be that hard for you, God, to heal me. So I either want to see you show up and heal me, or I'm done with this. Not that giving God an ultimatum ever works, but that's kind of where I was at. And I was like, I'm over it. I'm over this whole religion thing. And sure enough, that was when God really showed up for me. I kind of had to reach that point, I guess. And it was interesting at that time. I'll tell you a quick, interesting little story. I felt like God was saying to me, and I didn't have a framework for God speaking, but I felt like if I could say that he was speaking to me, that I was getting nudged to give up 3 things in my life, one of which was working out, the other was to cease going to Bible study for a time, and the other was to stop going to church. Now, those are all 3 things that I would never think God would say to anyone. So when I received a phone call from a friend of mine, randomly out of the blue, he had no idea what was going on for my life, and in my life, and he says to me, "You know what, Jen, I was praying for you this morning, and I feel like I have a word for you from the Lord." I thought, well, I have no idea what that is, but I'd love to hear it. And he said, I was praying, and I felt like the Lord saying to you to submit. And it was one of those moments where, I don't know if you've had those, where you just feel the Holy Spirit come over you in such a profound way. I immediately started sobbing. And I knew that was God speaking to me out of a place of deep love. And I knew exactly what it meant. And so at that time, I gave up those 3 things. And it was as if the Bible, and I literally would ride my bike down to the beach every Sunday morning, and I'd read the Bible for hours. And the Bible came alive to me in ways that had never come alive before. It was like words that I'd read, a million times popped out and meant something new for the first time. And I just felt like I just had this sweet, intimate relationship with the Father, and it was amazing. And anyway, so from there, God walked me through an amazing, amazing healing journey, and I got to understand who God is, the supernatural God. That was all new to me, and how He interacts with us on a day-to-day basis. And so, anyway, that I wanted to share part of my faith story to answer your question, because that has so largely shaped who I am, coming to understand how I'm loved, and who I am as a daughter of a really mighty King. So that really paved the foundation for then where I got to in terms of getting involved in the nonprofit space and writing books.
Well, it's really quite interesting, because in that narration is a very clear commentary on where the church has moved us from a messaging standpoint, that the transformational power of the Word of God is not being passionately preached in a way that you would actually hear from God to don't go to church. Mm-hmm. And honestly, although I would tell everyone, do not forsake the assembly of God, because it's exactly what the Bible says, I think that we can have our own assembly and our own Acts chapter 2 kind of upper room group that have a common vision and a common purpose and are there to support and uplift each other, and that what we think of conventional church today in its model is somewhat repetitive, mm-hmm. Single focus on Jesus only, and there's so many parts that are omitted from the narrative that we've kind of gone and divorced ourselves from the entirety of the message. And it's not God saying to you, leave the church. It's just that in this point in time in your life, the church is not your answer. The messages that are being preached in the church are not your answer.
That's right.
Your answer, I first need you to be at one with me.
Right.
As all salvation is individual relationship, not corporate. You move from the individual to the corporate, and that's the progression. And if you're struggling as an individual, you need to be set apart, set aside, so God can work on you individually, not with the whole body and you being one of the members. And so it sounds like a season of being set apart, and God wanting to speak with you one-on-one to address all those things that you were struggling with, because you asked Him. You kind of threw out the fleece to Him and said, hey, if you're real, and that's a very valid question, if you are real, make yourself known to me. And that's counsel I give to a lot of people who struggle in faith, that, listen, just ask the question. Put your head on the pillow tonight and say, Lord, if you are real, make yourself known to me. I'm going to sleep now. Many have awakened with dreams, visions, a new understanding. Some have gone weeks, months, and years of dry, but He never promised that He wasn't going to send us to the desert. Nothing in the Bible, we spent 40 years there. There's nothing in the Bible that promises a believer you're not going to have that desert experience, that dry season in your life. And so the fact that this was where you progressed to, and it was because of a personal struggle, that's exactly the way Jesus operated. He would look at you and know you had an eating situation, eating disorder, and instead of saying to you, listen, I know about your eating disorder, and He would say to you, what is it that you want? What is it you're going through? And He would relate to you, validate you, and then heal you. And so you had to go through that process. And when we realize that is the process we all must go through, okay, you've been able to articulate it, and I think that's quite encouraging to everyone that don't feel like the answer is found by going Sunday morning for an hour because you're doing God a favor. This is an everyday close contact, 24 hours a day. God doesn't want you to do more for him. He just wants you to do more with him. Just invite him into everything you do, and that's where you're going to find your answer. You've written this book. Now, I have to tell you that the consensus of agreement was across all of the people that in media that I work with was that this is an unusual title for a book, and one that requires real explanation. So if people care, they're going to go deeper. But it's not one of those with that catchy title that grabs you and says, oh, I got to read that. But it challenges you to say, okay, can I really impact the life of a child for a year for $4.83? And it takes me back to the pictures when I was a kid growing up in the 50s, and in the early 60s they began to air the commercials of you can feed a family in Biafra or some country for $5 a month.
Yeah.
And that kind of planted a seed. And then when I had kids, I told them we were moving to those countries because the cost of living was, I could make going so much further on my salary, right? That if I could feed a family of 4 for a month for $5, we were moving to that country. So, you know, that's been a joke with, I've got a 31-year-old daughter, and she said, Dad, do you remember when you told me we were moving to this country because you could feed a family of 4 for $5 a month? And I said, yeah. That was that was kind of the motivating factor for my kids, along with the fact that sometimes the male lion eats his young not because he's hungry. Those were two of the great motivators with my daughter. You know, and now they're funny, but at the time they didn't know what to make of it.
Oh, sure not.
But this idea of microfinance. Now, our artisanal, this growth in indigenous, if you watch Shark Tank or any of the programs where there is a cultural component to it, that they found a tribe in some part of the world that uniquely makes something, or they have a particular color because of a dye, and they found a way to raise money to engage a community and raise them out of poverty by creating microfinance kind of investments and starting businesses using the gifts and talents of multiple diverse cultural people around the world. How did this all come together? How did you get involved in this concept? Because this is ministry in a very different way. You know, it's not gospel centric, but it is gospel fueled, and that's different. It's not for the purpose of preaching the gospel and advancing the kingdom. It's for the purpose of feeding and clothing the widows and the orphans and the hungry and the needy, and then through that experience having them drawn into the why are you doing this, so that they can then hear and be open to receiving because they've benefited from the encounter. Now they want to know why. Why are you doing this? And then you can share the gospel message and the story. Yeah. So how did all this begin?
Yeah, so two things that come to my mind to share. So microfinance is not a new concept at all. I mean, there's even biblical concepts of gleaning are all throughout Scripture, and in the 1980s, Muhammad Yunus kind of formalized some things in Bangladesh, and it's gone from there. Microfinance, from a Christ-centered perspective, has been around for a number of years, and is a little bit different. So I'll touch on that in a second. But I wanted to reference a book by a guy named Brian Fickert, and he talks a lot about poverty and a different perspective on poverty. He looks at it through a series of broken relationships. So he defines poverty as a series of 4 broken relationships. The first being the relationship between you and God, you and yourself, you and community, and you and God's creation. And if there is any kind of brokenness in any one of those relationships, there's poverty. And what I love about that definition and that perspective of poverty is it kind of levels the playing field. It means that me living as, one of the top 1%, just as you in America, that's the reality, is we are in the top 1% of the world in terms of our income. We can experience poverty in our hearts and in our souls the same way that someone living on $1 or $2 a day can. Now, our experience of material poverty is very different, but our souls can be impacted by poverty just the same. So I love that, because it means that we all need Jesus, we all need God, we all need the gospel. And second to that, actually, you talk about Christ-centered microfinance as kind of being an inroad to the gospel, but a number of organizations actually merge their programming with the gospel, and so it is very Christ-centric. So I used to work for an organization called Hope International, and Hope has been around for, I want to say, about 25 years now, and serving 16, 17 countries around the world. And the loan officers that work for these microfinance banks, or they're financial banking institutions is what they are. They operate like banks, but have a different qualification in the countries where they operate. But the loan officers they're like pastors. So they have the head of a banker, heart of a pastor. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of Christ-centered microfinance that distinguishes it amongst regular microfinance, is because there's multiple bottom lines. It's not all about making money. It's about impacting the souls and the lives of those you're serving. And so you have these loan officers who are going into the community and praying with people. I mean, I also serve in the board of an organization called Esperanza International down in the Dominican Republic. And during this whole pandemic, one of the most impactful things that we continued to hear was a number of people that came to know Jesus because their loan officer would go and check on them and say, how are you doing? How can I pray for you? What's going on? How can I serve you and your family in this time? It wasn't about, you've defaulted on your loan, I got to make sure you pay, otherwise you're going to be blacklisted and you're never going to get a loan again. No, the mindset, the paradigm is so different with these organizations that have their hearts and their souls set on the Lord, and their approach to business is very different. And so in that too, I just want to touch on one other thing. I mean, I believe that work is a God-given thing, and that there's so much dignity that is found in work. And so when we can look at entrepreneurs around the world that are living in horrible poverty-stricken situations and look at them the same way that you and I would look to one of our peers here and say, you have everything that it takes to make a life for yourself and for your family. God didn't mess up on you. You have everything. You're just lacking a little bit of opportunity. And I think that's the beauty of microfinance, particularly Christ-centered microfinance, because it calls out the identity that someone has in the Lord. And then it says, and here's a little bit of capital that we can sow into you so that you can create a business or build, expand your current business or whatever it might be, so that you can be the one that partners with the Lord to provide for your family and change your community. So that's how I would answer that.
In the world of microfinance, where does the capital come from? Is this a 501c3 kind of operation that operates as a nonprofit and then makes investments, goes into a community, looks at opportunity, or do they take, I can't imagine somebody in Guatemala who's surfing the internet for microfinance opportunities to fill out an application like I would for a mortgage with Rocket Mortgage or with somebody else. It's just a whole different approach to language. I deal with a lot of people in Kenya. I deal with a lot of people in Pakistan. I can't imagine them. I just sent money to Kenya for them to get Wi-Fi. Uh, it was the router and the service was $243, and that's 25,000 Kenyan dollars. Okay, and they thought this was insurmountable, but they wanted to watch our programming and get all my teachings, and I teach every day of the week, and they then take the message and they bring it to the congregation on Sunday, and it's the only Bible education they have. They can't go to Bible school. They don't have the funds. So I sent them the money to go order from Nairobi the router, right, to be able to get Wi-Fi. And this was like mind-blowing for them that they could have Wi-Fi instead of one little old some antiquated version iPhone 4 or something that was that no one could gather around, no one could see, and they would have to transpose the closed caption in order to gather the message. And so giving them Wi-Fi because they hit their data limit was like giving them $1 million.
Yeah. Wow.
So how does this operate, and is it really $4.83?
Yeah. So microfinance, if you kind of look at like the pyramid of poverty, let's say you have the poor, the very poor, and the extremely poor, and the destitute. Microfinance typically makes sense for the very poor and the extremely poor. So the very poor benefit typically from micro loans, which are really small loans. $30, $50, $100, $200, depending on the country where the institution is operating. And then those in the extremely poor category that are making, less than $1.90 a day typically, would benefit the most from a savings group. So I'll briefly describe both of those things. So typically those that are, again, very poor would have some sort of a business, that they've started a way of making regular payments back, some sort of steady stream of income, be it small, but is steady. Those in the extremely poor category often don't. They're, subsistence farmers. They don't have a business. So the lending component can work, one of several ways. But to your point, what you're talking about, a lot of times in these rural communities, they might be illiterate. They don't know how to read and write. They don't, have access to a bank at all. And so these loan officers, as I mentioned before, will go out into these communities, and sometimes they'll take fingerprints. That's kind of their form of identification. And a lot of times, a lot of the ways that these individuals will qualify for a loan is through social collateral. So if one person wants a loan, he or she will have to find 5 or so other friends who also want a loan, and they will cross guarantee each other's loans. So if one of them doesn't pay, the others are then responsible for making a payment back on their behalf. And that helps because in these places they don't really have collateral to qualify for a loan the way that you or I would, and so that's how they use social collateral to do so. So then the money is lent out, it's used within that community, which is then sometimes buffered by a larger community. And what's really cool about that is you have these little microeconomies that start to form. So if one person's selling tomatoes, another person's baking bread, and another person's selling milk, y'all are going to buy and purchase one another's products within your group to help each other, and thereby the whole community starts to rise. So second to that is the savings groups, which I mentioned. Savings groups actually don't have any sort of capital infusion. And to your point, a lot of these organizations are 501c3s. They have outside capital that comes in. The money is then lent out. It's then paid back with a little bit of interest, and then it gets relent out again, which is the beauty of it. So your $1 gets reused again and again and again, which is a part of the power of microfinance. On the savings group side, there's no capital infusion into these groups. So you have a group of people in a community, and let's say 10, 20 people, and there's a facilitator from a local church who will help to facilitate this group, and they will come together and they will agree on an amount of money they want to save. And so this is just a place for them to have a safe place to save, because most of the time they save money under mattresses, they dig holes, whatever, and then a storm will come through and it's gone, or a neighbor will come by and say, my son has malaria, I know you have money, give it to me, and the social pressure will require them to do just that. So they have no way of getting ahead or saving for a business or whatever it might be. So they'll sit together as a group of 10 or 20 people, and they'll say, all right, we're going to save 10 cents a week. And then over time, they've accumulated this pool of savings. And so then they'll do one of several things with it. They'll either just continue to save, or they'll lend the money to one another within the group. Or they'll lend the money to people outside of the group, and they'll charge interest and they'll determine the terms, but they're the ones setting the rules. And so again, you have these kind of little microeconomies that start to form. And sometimes they'll save the money and they'll determine the person with the greatest need will get the lump sum first, and maybe they'll all buy goats, or they'll all buy mattresses, or they'll all plant seeds, and they'll help each other farm. But what's also really cool is these groups kind of they're communities, but they also become like little Bible studies or life groups or small little church communities, like we were talking about before, where they are depending on one another for far more than just what they're able to save. So that's the beautiful thing. And then to answer your question about $4.83, so yes, that is absolutely a real number. I'll tell you how we got there. So we took data from 3 different organizations, and the 483, this was a couple of years ago, so they were 2019 numbers before the pandemic, but and 483 fell right in the middle. So organizations can do it for cheaper as well, but we looked at the amount of money that it costs for an individual to go through a program for a year, and that amount was $19.37. And again, there's a lot more complex things going into that number, but I'll just leave it for simplicity's sake there. And then at that time, the average family size based on the UN's numbers at that time was 4.01. So we simply divided out 1937 by 4.01, and the cost was $4.83 to impact the life of a child for a year. So again, a little oversimplified in that sense, but the numbers are all there to back up that formula to get there.
We're talking with Jenn Tarbell, who along with Lance Wood have written a book called $4.83, The Cost to Impact the Life of a Child for a Year, Maybe Forever. It is a dive into this concept of microfinance, something that is new to many of our viewers, something that if you've followed programs like Shark Tank or some other programs that talk about looking to infuse money into impoverished communities to make a contribution without donation but bringing value to the community is something that we all want to know how we can make a contribution, and this is one of those ways. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk more about this microfinance and how you can get involved, what you can do, and how this impacts you personally, and what that looks like. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitingnation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitingnation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitingnation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Jenn Tarbell, author of the book $4.83, The Cost to Impact the Life of a Child for a Year, Maybe Forever. Jenn, welcome back.
Thanks, Rabbi. Good to be here.
It sounds wonderful, ideal, to be able to go into impoverished communities and impact and even put together co-ops and find compatible and unify them in such a way that maybe a business can develop and they can move up from that abject poverty into mildly impoverished, into possibly even finding some success in connecting with a corporation or an investment group that wants to do something like we talked about on Shark Tank, that they go out and they find out, is there a central repository of all these groups that I can kind of look at and say, wow, this looks really interesting, and you know, I'm an investor, and if I could put together this group that makes beautiful linen scarves or sandals or watch bands or whatever it is that they do, and can invest in this and get them to begin to employ people in their community and create a business, and whether or not they have the financial or literary capabilities, that with oversight and with help, it can change that community's entire dynamic by infusing not hundreds of thousands of dollars, but being paid for in a microfinance way. And we're not talking about big investment. is there a return on this investment, or is this charitable donation?
Yeah, great question. So several ways to answer that. A lot of organizations that we represent in the book, there are 501c3s, so you give a donation, they put your money to good use. It does get repaid back, but it stays within the portfolio of the organization to get relent out, again and again and again. So that is one piece there. There is also an organization called Kiva, KIVA.org, which we also reference in the book as well, and that is a kind of like a Travelocity, if you will, for microfinance institutions. So they don't actually do any sort of microlending themselves, but they are representative of a multitude of different organizations, Christ-centered and secular alike. But you can go on there and you can read profiles and read about the businesses of these entrepreneurs in all kinds of different countries around the world and say, that one, I want to give $50 to fund that person's loan. And then it does get repaid back. And so you'll get that money back in a sense, not with a return, but you'll get your $50 back, and then you can relend it out to another entrepreneur if you choose. And there are investment funds that different organizations do have that many require qualified investors, where there is a small return for a larger investment if you want to put a larger investment in and then it gets lent out, or maybe you want to start a new country, the banking in a new country, and it's a risky investment because microfinance can be very risky if you're getting involved in countries where there's high corruption or be it different kinds of things like that can impact the lending. So there you can feel free to reach out to us, and we can get you more information on that via our website, as you mentioned before, is www.kids-win.com. But we can get you plugged in there. But yeah, so to answer your question, there are different ways that you can invest. Another common thing is called impact investing, and different institutions will do that kind of a thing where you're able to invest larger sums of money to actually get a return. So it just depends on how you want to get involved, in what way, but the simplest way is to simply give a donation, and then it, as I said, does get return. There's a return on it for the organization itself to then get relent out.
So this person goes in a community, they identify a community that has a need. They go in as a counselor, they kind of evaluate. Do they bring the Bibles?
The loan officers that with the organizations, yes, they do. In some instances, obviously it depends on the context of the country, if it's closed or not. But a lot of times Bibles and biblical curriculum are provided as well. So they'll do, parenting things and food-related things and different educational things for different families, just to give them some biblical counsel on how to handle a variety of topics. So there's teachings, biblical teachings, Bible studies, again, depending on the organization, but there is absolutely the biblical infusion with the Christ-centered microfinance organizations that we've worked with.
Now, the way you present the book is that the cost to impact the life of a child, but it sounds to me like it's the parents that are being impacted, and it's the trickle-down economics of if the parents have more capital to work with, they have more resources available to them, that the child benefits. But is the focus on necessarily the child? And that's the impetus, so that you're going to raise a generation that has a future in this microfinanced industry or business or community, that it is to be presented to them as generational, and that's where the impact to the child comes in.
Yes, so two ways of answering that. Yes, we do largely focus on the kind of the trickle-down effect. So there's a study done by Vision Fund, which is a partner to World Vision, and they looked at 89,000 families, and they found that 99% of the time when you offer Christ-centered microfinance services, that across a series of 9 different outcomes, 99% of the time, children will benefit in at least one of those outcomes, and a large majority of the time, they'll benefit in at least 3 of them. So one of the things we talk about through the book is we have this little formula we've created, that parents plus opportunity equals kids win. It's God's design, right? When you keep a family together and you empower the parents, they have everything that's necessary, and they've been equipped to prepare for their kids, to prepare the way for their kids. And so we are firm proponents of everything you can do to empower the parents will automatically empower the children. So that is one thing that we talk about. And on the flip side of that, there are different kids groups that have been impacted as well. So there's savings groups that have focused just on kids. Some younger teenagers have received loans and things like that. So microfinance does benefit the kids directly as well in a variety of different communities. And then we also talk about, just kind of the indirect application of microfinance. Part of Lance's story is he had adopted 2 children from Ethiopia, and his son Abraham came from a family who his mom, her husband died, Abraham's dad died, and she was left with 3 children and no way of providing for them. The business was gone. The community was not helpful, and her youngest son Abraham was near death, and so she had to make this impossible decision to give him up for adoption. And Lance's family ended up being on the receiving end of Abraham, but their first question was, well, can't we just, if this is a financial issue, can't we just give her the money to help them out of the situation? And it doesn't work like that. But what's interesting is that most orphans around the world actually are not orphans. They're in a situation where their families are struggling financially and not able to care for the child. And so when you look at it, kind of the flip side of that, gosh, if these parents were just able to have a little opportunity to buy that cow, to grow that crop, whatever it might be, they'd be able to keep their family intact. And then, separately, I spent some time in the Ukraine and in Moldova in doing some research for this book and learning a lot about the trafficking trade globally. And in a similar way, so many of these young children, teenagers, get roped into these situations where they're going to get jobs overseas because they can't get a job in their local communities because there aren't any. And so they go with the promise of making a great income, so on and so forth, and they get there and it's not what they were told, and now all of a sudden they're involved in a brothel, and they had just had a job, an opportunity for a job that would have changed. It would have been different. So anyway, a couple different ways of looking at that, but the impact on the impact of microfinance on kids, again, both indirect and direct.
Is there a country or a region that you have found over the years that has prospered more from microfinance than other regions in the world?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have any good data that's immediately coming to my mind on that specifically, but it is in virtually every country. So and it is operating, and I would say it's the most effective in these rural areas where there aren't other opportunities, because even in some markets there's oversaturation of microfinance banks. So in these rural, remote places, particularly with the Christ-centered piece, where they're not totally money driven and looking at the bottom line from a financial perspective, but they're looking at it from a different lens of being able to share the gospel and help and empower these communities, that's where I think where it's largely most effective, in areas where it doesn't exist. And that's hard work to do, and costly too. But that's where it's so effective in creating economies where there were none and helping these communities transform out of poverty.
Well, I'm personally familiar with Ukraine, having ministered there multiple times to the Holocaust surviving community and to the emerging Jewish community of Ukraine in Odessa and Nikolaev, and in the Black Sea region, and familiar with the orphan problem. We've also worked very closely with an organization on the Ganges River with 30 million orphans living in abject poverty. There's no homes. There's only 3 orphanages to serve 30 million children. And so you bathe in a crocodile-infested river, and you go in and many don't come out. And so that's a critical need around the world. So I want to give to this. I don't want to return. I want to sow into it, and I want make a contribution, okay, what's the single best way? Is it to go to the website, kids-win.com?
Yeah, and actually, we're in the process right now of revamping it to do just that so we can receive donations. So in the meantime, you can find out what organizations we support on there and make a direct contribution to one of them. But in the next couple of weeks, we're actually trying to go beyond the book. We're not looking to be a 501c3 ourselves, but we are looking to raise nearly $500,000 to support these organizations over the next year. So that is one of our goals, is to create a little bit more of a movement and create some awareness around this, and then 100% of the donations will go directly into the organizations that we represented in the book. But for now, you can find out who those organizations are in the book and on the site, and make direct contributions to them.
Okay, before we run out of time, who do you see as the target consumer of this book that's going to be motivated to engage? That they're getting pitched at by every major ministry in the world, and this simple concept of $4.83. If somebody can't afford $5, then that's not that's not who it is. But people who want to make a difference and can afford the $5. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's just if it's grassroots fundraising and the average donation is $5, $10, $15, $20, how do we get this information out to them other than doing this show? And where do you see placing the book to get the most traction?
So it is available on large retailers, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, of course, as well as our website. You can make a purchase there. We are working currently with a publicist and another media team to create a video and create some more awareness. So we're working on that. So we'll have a video to share and links to share, of course, on our website as well. So appreciate just helping to get the awareness out. And to answer your question about who the book is for, I mean, the concept $4.83 I think is very attainable for most people. What we have found that as far as kind of a target audience are Christian business leaders, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists who really want to go deep and understand the impact of their giving dollar and how to make the most impact with what God's given them to steward. So we think in a lot of cases that will kind of be the people this resonates with the most.
Well, Jenn, it's something that intrigued me about going into communities and helping communities become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and to bring some unity into more cooperative relationships. And having this as a Christ-centered microfinance program adds that much more impact to it, that you're not just putting food in their belly, you are actually working on the salvation of their soul, and that's much more. I would rather have them go hungry into heaven than with full bellies and go into hell. And so I thank you for that, and I thank you for sharing this. Once again, the book is called $4.83, The Cost to Impact the Life of a Child for a Year, Maybe Forever. I would encourage you, the proceeds from the book, all the net proceeds from the books are donated to Christ-centered microfinance organizations. So first thing you can do is get a copy of the book on Amazon. Click the link on the ignitingnation.com website, and a copy will be on its way. And the proceeds from the book are going to this microfinance effort. So even just buying the book, you are making a contribution. And so we are delighted that you shared this with us. You've been a great guest, and we ask for every blessing of God to increase the work that you're doing and to give you favor with those who might be listening that have the ability with large funds to be able to sow into this and affect communities that they may never see, in people groups they may have known nothing about, but they can impact the life of a child forever. Thank you, Jenn.
Thank you, Rabbi. Appreciate it.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.